Hey everybody, so it's about time I get another one of these back to basics videos out. I think I have maybe 3 or 4 already recorded in the can, so I've gone ahead and edited a lot of these, but then I've just not gotten around to doing the voiceovers, so these are a little bit disconnected. It's a few days away. I felt like the first workout was really just kind of an introduction to this style of training, where this one was where I started to really get into the flow of it. So I'm a huge fan of thrusters that I'm doing here. I think that a lot of people don't think about just holding it in kind of a goblet squat position and then pushing up, but it's surprisingly comfortable on your shoulders and wrists. And so, if you're not really strong enough or just don't have the shoulder stamina to be doing super heavy stuff, you can always do singles. This is just a staggered stance deadlift. So, when you're using kettlebells, you're not really able to lift that heavy of weights, which in most cases is totally fine. But I find that with deadlifting, one of the lifts that you can potentially load up a ton on, you're going to need to do some sort of unilateral work or something from a disadvantaged position. So I generally will do either like a deep sumo or some sort of single leg variation like this. You can tell I'm still kind of tight and fatigued. I'm not doing a lot of rest in between. So this is just me carrying my Bulgarian bag and kind of, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, I guess American football style, but it essentially feels like a bear hug, but just on one arm. I like to do a lot of unilateral loading just because that has tremendous benefits in terms of core stability. So I do some, core isolation type things, but a lot of the stuff I do basically would just constitute like carrying weights under load and usually doing something unilateral, something where there's a big stability component. So here I am back to thrusters. I'm kind of just getting right back into it. I was taking very little rest between these sets. So I'd say the weights were heavy enough that it felt like a kind of a traditional strength training session. But then what I was doing is I was just keeping the rest time short in order to add a little bit of that metabolic conditioning element as well. Here I am back at these second round of deadlifts. I'm still getting used to these staggered stance ones. They're pretty good. I do like using the unilateral ones a lot because I don't get a ton of fatigue in my actual grip and upper back, which a lot of people want that in deadlifting, but if you're doing any sort of kettlebell training, you're getting so much grip fatigue and upper back training anyways that's really not necessary, and you're really just trying to kind of train your hips and lower body. These one-arm carries felt pretty good, but my bicep was sort of in a weird position. I still need to refine the technique. It's just something new that I'm trying out. I think that there's a lot of utility to it. I just don't have a lot of proficiency with it yet. You can tell I'm just really not used to strength training after that month of calisthenics, so I'm just not moving as explosively as possible. And the fatigue is definitely mounting as well. When it comes to thrusters, I'm actually not that concerned about it being explosive because I just try to get it explosive enough that it gets over my head, because I know that I'm at least producing enough force to make that happen. So as long as I don't feel like my arms are the main driving force and just kind of a stabilizing force, then I know I'm doing a decent job. So I definitely prefer these over barbell thrusters or similar movements. I just think that you can actually do them pretty rhythmically. I like kettlebells because you can do somewhat heavy complexes for high reps and conditioning work, but I feel like something like a barbell is just not as well equipped for doing that. So I tend to stray away from more like what you might see in CrossFit and just stick to the kettlebells. Here you can start seeing the fatigue. You can see a little bit of a forearm pump going on. And then now I am going into double half snatches. So I'm a huge fan of double half snatches. I've tried double, like just full on double snatches before, and they put me in a really compromised position. And here I am just cutting straight into front rack squats. So at this point, I'm just running it similar to kind of a normal kettlebell complex. I think I was doing a few sets of this. And so the reason that I like the half snatch specifically when using double bells is that the snatch just pulls you out of position and it can get really easy to kind of tweak your back. There's essentially so much weight crashing down, whereas doing the half snatch lets you still get that explosive overhead snatch movement, but you're not really compromising your form on the way down, and you're still getting like a double clean. So it's not like you're getting no weight on the way down. You're still getting that stretch and that explosive rebound effect. So I really like these. If you're somebody like me, I think there are some people who can get away with doing double snatches, but I find that somebody like me, kind of like longer limbs, shorter torso, it's really hard not to just get bent over to the point where it's not helpful. And then I think I just had double snatches programmed in for this one, but I just got started getting fatigued. And since this wasn't like one of the heavier days that I had intended, I just went to single arm snatches. So, it's totally fine to do single arm snatches like the full way. I don't have any issues with that. It's just the double ones. And then here I was just doing single arm as well. Again, it was just a way to modulate the load because I don't have lighter kettlebells than these 16 kilograms. So I'm still building up the strength, and I don't really mind tweaking the program in that case. So I think going to singles is probably one of the easiest ways just to decrease the load when it comes to kettlebell training. A lot of people think there's not that many ways you can modulate the load, but that's not necessarily true. Especially if you're working with doubles, you can cut down to singles. If you have a few different kettlebells, there's still enough variety that you can make adjustments accordingly. You just have to be a little bit more strategic about it. I'll also say with kettlebell training, there's not really any advantage to doing percentage-based lifting because you're just not going to be able to do anything even close to kind of the fine-tuning that you get with barbell training or even dumbbells, where you're getting these like 5-pound increments. And so you're just going to have to rely on RPE. At least the way I do RPE is I just roughly translate what I think the percentages would be. So like an RPE 6 would be lifting probably what would feel like 60% of my 1 rep max. I'm not sure if that's exactly how it's done, but I found that's close enough for me to go off by feel. I definitely am somebody, like, I do prefer percentage-based training when you can do it. It's just not a reality with a kettlebell, unless you get ones that are loadable, which at some point I would like to get the kind of a 70 pounds that are loadable. I think those would be awesome just for taking on trips, and it would let me really fine-tune the loading strategy. So at that point, I think it would be a bit different. But for the time being, I'm just working with a few different weights, and so I just have to make do. Not much else to say about this other than I just love snatches. So a snatch to me feels just like a swing on steroids. It's essentially like the CrossFit style overhead swing that people go for. I'm not sure why people do that except as a progression, because the snatch really just does the exact same thing where you're exploding enough that you're getting that overhead position and it's not quite as silly. I'm not necessarily opposed to that exercise. I just think that, the snatch usually fills in that need a lot more effectively and has a lot more carryover. So here I'm doing some bodybuilding style stuff. These are basically Gironda sissy squats. Notice that my heels are elevated because it's a quad focus exercise. And so I just like to get in the goblet squat position, elevate my heels. And I'm essentially doing the difference between a Gironda sissy squat and a normal sissy squat is it's essentially a hybrid where you lower as much as you can and then still kind of sit back. So the bottom is basically a feet elevated front squat where the top is like a sissy squat. And then you kind of, it's hard to explain, and I probably should have shown from the side, but it's almost like you're lifting through the front of your hips. Like your knee extension is really the driving force more so than just like the normal pushing through your glutes. So you will get some glute stuff just for stabilizing. And I think here I was just doing I think I have a little like heel stretch bar that I just can't see in this because of the frame cut off. But I'm just doing some calf raises here. Calves are genetically my biggest weak point. So you'll probably see me doing accessory work for them a lot. I have pretty, good leg genetics except for the calves. I just have high insertions. So I also think calf training is just good because protecting your lower legs from injuries is pretty important. If you're doing a lot of strength training, you're going to be fairly resistant to injury as long as you're not just like using machines or being stupid. But then people will forget to train a lot of these like higher pressure areas like the ankles where they're just getting tons of use all day long. And so I think that you need to pay a lot of attention to your ankles, to your wrists, to your fingers, because those things get really beat up over time. And if you get problems lower on the chain like that, then it's just going to carry over. And here I'm doing very awkward looking sapates. So the sapate is essentially, I guess you could call it like a Hindu push-up burpee variant, where what you do is you do a Hindu squat into a Hindu push-up. So it's the next progression essentially. So it's the Pelwan wrestling equivalent of a normal burpee. I just like them better because I like the Hindu push-ups better than normal push-ups if I'm doing high reps. There's totally nothing wrong with the burpee. This actually feels very similar. You're getting essentially the same effect where you're, doing a lower body movement, shifting into an upper body movement, and then jumping up. So you're still using the physics of gravity and the blood pushing around your body to get a cardiovascular effect. I just find that there's a little bit more of a mobility component. You can kind of get a flow going. I'm just really bad at them, so there's not that much of a flow to it yet. But you essentially get into the squat and then dive forward. Here I'm just doing some kettlebell drag curls. I really like drag curls. Most of the bodybuilding accessories I do these days are some of Vince Gironda's stuff, just because I find that I don't need to use a ton of weight to get a result. If I'm doing bodybuilding type stuff, I'm going to be playing with leverages. I don't need to use heavy weights because there's just no need for that. So, especially for stuff like this, where I'm just doing conditioning work at the end. And the other thing I like about these is, the harder leverages means you can use lighter weights. So if you're training at home, you're really going to want to try and take advantage of leverage as much as possible because it's one of the tools that you have always available. And then here I'm kind of going to some primal flow type stuff, just some stretch warm-ups. You can tell that I'm super rusty because I'm just not moving the way I was before. I'm still actually regaining a lot of that primal flow skill. Even in later videos, you can see I'm still regaining the grace. So some of it is just I'm very fatigued by this point in the workout. This is like kind of the end goal, or this is like the end of the workout and I'm pretty exhausted. But the other thing is just that I'm like really rusty. I didn't do anything like this. So even though I have the strength for my calisthenics style training, I don't have like the same mobility and coordination. So I think I just haven't spent enough time doing primal flow for those skills to be really ingrained. So I think that's an important thing to learn. Usually I'm somebody who there's a lot of physical things that I can maintain pretty easily, but apparently primal flow isn't one of them. I'm not a very naturally mobile person. I have to do a lot of work to maintain any sort of mobility. So I imagine that's like a lot of it. I just felt I didn't feel like strength wise I was really lacking, but I definitely felt a little more like cumbersome and awkward. Some of it's just me training in this hallway. It's pretty narrow. And by now I'm pretty gassed, so I've got a good chest bump though. And like and subscribe.